Well, I mean, you said it. The biggest thing for me is retaining whatever they can. They're already in the hole when it comes to the cap. They're already talking about extending Jalen Hurts upwards of $45 to $50 million a year in terms of that contract. You have players like Brandon Graham, Hargrave, Jason Kelsey contemplating retirement, but still technically qualified as a free agent. Gardner Johnson. Obviously, you have James Bradbury. You have Miles Sanders. You have Boston Scott. The list truly and honestly is endless in terms of what players are available for free agency when it comes to Philadelphia. So my biggest need is managing the salary cap. Who are you willing to let go? Who are you willing to retain? Who are you willing to restructure? Who's willing to take a pay cut? Who are you going to draft? Are you going to trade up in the draft? Are you going to trade back in the draft? Are you going to sign people and trade them? Howie Roseman has a very tall task in front of him. We made a video similar to this a couple of weeks ago about Philly potentially being a one and done team because of all the players they have on this roster right now or right as the Super Bowl ended. They're not all going to be back. So the odds of them making a run as dominant as they did this season are very slim. Unless Howie goes and signs Jalen Hurts to like a veteran minimum deal, which we all know is impossible. Jalen Hurts went out and potentially outperformed, depending on who you ask, Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl, and they fell short, yes. But a performance like that, a season like that, that kind of increases your value that much more, especially when you're like, yeah, I may have fumbled the ball, but we sure as shit didn't lose because of me because I went out and scored 4 touchdowns. That's on the defense. No pass rush, no turnovers. So that's what I'm looking at, right? So top priority is definitely going to be maintaining their salary cap. And second for me, because I don't have a whole lot of critiques, is going to be who are they hiring to replace their coaching staff? They lost Shane Steichen because he's the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. They lost Jonathan Gannon, who was their defensive coordinator, who is now the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. It is going to be a matter of who steps in and replaces the coaches that put these players in the position to win. Nick Sirianni has got a tall task in front of him in hiring coaching staff to replace, and then Howie Roseman's got the tallest task to seeing what team he can bring back. If not, what team is he going to basically rebuild to try to bring the Eagles back to the Super Bowl? So I would say managing the cap and then having to figure out what you're going to do with your coaching staff. Those are going to be my two issues.
Yeah, and Kev, to go over the free agent list, I actually have the list right here. If you don't mind, can I list off some of the players that are going
Absolutely.
to be on the free agent list for the Eagles? You got Fletcher Cox, one of their core players on the defensive side of the ball. Has been there for years. Brandon Graham, one of their defensive captains. Jason Kelsey, another captain. He's 35 years old on the offensive line. Retirement could be a real possibility for him this offseason, but who knows? He may come back for another season of football. You got James Bradbury. Unfortunately, got that holding call in the Super Bowl against him, but still one of the better corners in the NFL. He's only 29 years old. Outside of that, you got some offensive players to take care of. You got Miles Sanders. You got Boston Scott. I mean, these are some pretty big name players. And then if I had to throw one more name out there on the defensive side of the ball, it's going to be Chauncey Gardner Johnson. So, this is kind of the double-edged sword that comes with the Eagles. The Eagles definitely went all in to try to get a Super Bowl before Jalen gets this massive contract extension, which is going to happen eventually. And Jalen's going to be making somewhere around $40 to $45 million a year. They went all out and they fell just a little bit short. They got to the big game, but just couldn't bring the Lombardi Trophy home to Philly. And I will say, just with how things are looking, this is going to be a completely different team going into next season, but they're still going to be competitive in my eyes. So if there's one thing, if I had to point to when it comes to something that they can adjust this offseason, Kev, this is something that really showed itself in the Super Bowl. I know that they have a pretty decent pass rush, but the fact that this pass rush wasn't able to show up in the biggest game of the year is a little bit concerning. The Eagles are still one of the better teams when it comes to just overall sacks. They led the league in sacks this year. But in the biggest game of the year, they were a no-show. And we already know that this team is going to look a little bit different going into this upcoming season. So people that are thinking, oh, well, what they did this year is going to transition into next year. That's not going to be the case. More than likely, this team is going to have a drop-off with the amount of sacks that they have or they had from this past season. Now, when it came to them, they were a couple sacks from getting the all-time record in the NFL for the amount of sacks in one season. I think that they're going to have a pretty precipitous drop-off. And to me, it's how big is a drop-off going to be? Because, when you hit 70 sacks, more than likely you're not going to be able to match that or supersede that. So you're going to be in a situation where, okay, if we're dropping down from 70, how many sacks do we have to get to be able to still be a productive pass rush? If they could get somewhere around 45 to 50 sacks as a unit going into next year, despite the offseason moves that are going to take place, I think that would be a success in my eyes. But if they go anything below that, if they're kind of treading around 40 to 35 sacks going into next year, that's going to be a failure as far as I see it. So they're going to have to make some moves to be able to retain some of their players on their pass rush. And like I already said, they have a lot of free agents that they need to attend to this offseason. But, when it came to their pass rush, they were great throughout the regular season. They were great in some of these playoff games that they had. But in the biggest game of the year, they fell completely short. They fell flat on their face when it came to their pass rush. And that was despite the fact that Patrick Mahomes was limited going into that game with the amount of injuries that he was dealing with throughout the game, because he had that high ankle sprain before the game had even taken place and re-aggravated it before halftime. So overall, I still believe the Eagles are going to be a competitive team. They're going to compete for one of the top spots in the NFC next year. I don't know if they'll be the number one team in the NFC, but they're going to be in the contention for it. But they went all in this past season. They fell a little bit short, and some things are going to change because of that. Overall, the Eagles, they're going to have a lot to attend to this offseason. But I think if they made the right moves to form a decent roster going into next year, I think they have a very good chance to be able to potentially make another NFC Championship game. And then who knows, maybe get to another Super Bowl. But time will tell. A lot of things are going to happen. Jalen's eventually going to get his contract extension, which is going to really change some things with the team. And we'll see where it goes from there.